Velkommen til Rig på Viden, en podcast om forskning i investering, finans og økonomi. Mit navn er Andrea Thormann.
In this episode, we talk to Arna Olafsson, who is Associate Professor at CBS. We talk about household finance and how people make decisions in their savings accounts. Hey Arna, thanks a lot for taking the time on a Sunday. For those who don't know you, can you maybe start by introducing yourself?
Yes, I am Arna Olafsson, and I am an associate professor at Copenhagen Business School, the Department of Finance. And I have been here for 12 years now. And I work mainly on household finance and behavioral finance. And I also have some projects that are on financial intermediation. Before I joined here, I did my PhD at the Stockholm School of Economics and at Berkeley University in California. I did like a visiting position there for 2 years. And a lot of my research, as I mentioned, is like household finance and kind of how individuals' behavior deviate from what we would think of optimal or as kind of predicted by standard theory.
Great. And you're also doing a conference, I know, about household finance. Can you maybe tell a bit about that?
Yes. So this is an idea that came up actually 10 years ago. So it's been in the making for
That's really a long in the making time.
Exactly. So it was an idea that we got at the annual meeting of the American Finance Association in 2016. So it was an idea that Andreas Fagereng and I had back then. And in the meantime, we had in total 8 children. So we have been busy with other things and also with research. But now we said, okay, now it's finally time to make this become reality. Because I think this kind of a conference, and actually the idea behind it originally was that household finance is becoming a really, really big field in the Nordic countries and has been a big attraction for a lot of household researchers to actually come to the Nordic countries. When I came here first, there were only a couple of us, but now we have so many household finance researchers. And the reason is both that, data availability here is great. So it's very attractive for researchers to come here and get access to really, really good data. But of course, also at the same time, household finance has grown a lot as a field.
That makes sense. And it's something you will do on an annual basis from now on, no?
Yes, exactly. So the idea is that we go between the Nordic countries. This inaugural event is going to be here in Copenhagen. And so we now have a 5-year plan, and so next we will be in Finland, and then after that we don't know exactly the order, but we have plans to go to Sweden, and then to Lillehammer in Norway, and then to Reykjavik in Iceland, and then after that we'll see where we go next.
That's also a bit far out, so yeah. That's great. And today, just to establish a foundation before we talk about your paper, we're going to talk about allocation and dynamics of household financial assets. Can you maybe start by establishing some knowledge for us around what we already know from literature about this topic?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that we know a lot on the big margins, we know a lot about how households kind of allocate their wealth between liquid and illiquid assets, between risky and non-risky assets, who participates in the stock market, when individuals should refinance, and we also know that people often, or like the consequences from kind of or from making small errors in these dimensions can actually lead to large financial losses. So it builds up. But what we do not know so much about, or at least in relation to this paper that we're going to talk about, is that when we zoom in, for instance, in this case, we zoom in on liquid safe assets, then we do not know much what is going on there. So it's more like a black box, and it's actually a big black box. Most people think about when we say, okay, risky, non-risky, liquid assets, and then it's kind of okay, wow, that is quite limited. Then you're ignoring kind of stocks and all funds and everything. I mean, what is it? Is it interesting? But actually, the majority of households, this is their financial portfolio. This is the only part, because they don't have any risky part in their financial portfolio. So this is a very, very important topic, how people optimize within this category.
That makes sense. And if you look at a decision made overall in household finance, are people behaving rational?
It's a good question. And so what we can say is that when we compare actual behavior of individuals to the predictions of standard theory, then we see actually that there's a lot of deviations. And this was not actually, and this is something we have learned a lot about in recent years, because before that we didn't have so great data as we do today. So in recent years we have been able to bring a lot of theoretical predictions to the data that we were not able to test before. So we actually now know that, okay, the models that we used to work with, they were actually not maybe as good description of reality as we hoped they would be. So we know that there is a lot of deviations. And when this happens, that then allows us to go, or gives us some input, so we can go back to the drawing boards and design better kind of models that are then better at predicting reality. So, and this is kind of why also household finance became such a big field. There was a lot of demand after that, after the financial crisis, because people said, hey, you have all these models and they're not predicting actually what is happening. So what is going on? So there has been a big pressure kind of for finance to become more kind of evidence-based. And with the availability of data that we now have, I mean, this is really what has happened. And also kind of, as I mentioned, the reason why household finance has become such a big topic. It's really kind of about the things that happened during the financial crisis. We were able to investigate kind of the relevant things in relation to that. But then, even though we see this deviation from kind of real behavior deviates from the predictions of standard theory, it's still very difficult to say that people are irrational or that they are making financial mistakes. Because if it's very easy to justify more or less any behavior as optimal just by, or you could say that it's unobserved constraints, preference or beliefs can't justify these behaviors as optimal. And if you think about in our case, kind of what we are looking at, we kind of, if you just assume, for instance, that individuals, if there's a small cost of reallocating, that can be the cost of kind of, or this mental load of having to go into your bank account and move funds, no kind of monetary cost or anything like this, kind of, okay, a little bit this mental cost. And then we have some kind of rational inattention. Then if we just assume that in a model, then we actually get quite close to what we are observing. So we don't need much more than that in order to kind of get aggregate predictions that are in line with the empirical evidence that we find in the paper.
Okay, and if we then zoom out just a little bit, also again in terms of getting an idea of what we actually know, is there some big differences in how people behave in household finance around the world? Is it possible to say something around that?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of actually research, a lot of the topics that kind of, or kind of recurring topics, they have been investigated in various settings. And this is also the nice thing about kind of this data availability. It's almost everywhere. Of course, we have great registered data here in the Nordic countries, but there's a lot of other great data in other countries. And a lot of the topics have been investigated around the world. And what we see is that there is more or less everywhere kind of the same behaviors that we see. When you see kind of inaction, when you see kind of, the failure to participate in risky asset markets and these things, this is something that we see across the world. Gender gaps as well. It's really, and this is kind of has taught us that it doesn't really matter where your data comes from. It also teaches you about the world. It's not only teaching us about kind of Danish investors or Icelandic investors or American investors when we have these kind of data. I mean, it's teaching us really something about human behavior.
Okay, and because I would think that there would be some key differences between, I guess, developed and developing markets, for example, right? But there is nothing clear there.
I would say kind of most of the research in household finance, I mean, that is really within kind of Western or developed countries. So kind of the research that is done within developing countries, that is kind of something that more belongs to kind of developing or development economics. But some kind of still studies in household finance come from developing countries. And then I would say kind of some of the topics, they are just kind of not real topics in developed countries. But when there is an overlap, then we see the same.
Okay, interesting. And what about gender differences? So do men and women behave materially differently?
Yeah. I mean, in finance, yes. I mean, it's very difficult to say, like in the paper that we are talking about today, we see some differences, but it's kind of hard to kind of, I would be careful at kind of interpreting that too much, kind of what we learned there about gender differences. We do see some differences there, but that is not something that was kind of the focus of the paper. But in general, we see large gender differences. Women are less likely to participate in the stock market and in general risky asset markets. And if they do participate, they invest a lower share of their financial wealth into risky assets. They trade less, and in general kind of have therefore built up less wealth over their life cycle. And this has kind of become even more important in recent years, because there's a lot of kind of push kind of towards putting the responsibility of individuals' financial decision-making onto the individual, in particular if we think of, for instance, retirement or pension savings. I mean, individuals are now individually responsible for deciding how to invest their retirement savings. So if women are then if they get lower return on their savings, I mean, this will be on top of having lower retirement savings per se, kind of if they also have a lower return, I mean, that will increase this gender gap that we have observed for a very long time. That will increase that even further. And then there's a lot of other things that is very interesting now that are taking place that can have also large impacts on the gender gap. There is technology in financial decision making. All these apps that we now have and trading platforms. There is, we have also OpenAI, and these kind of technologies. Men and women are adopting them and using them in very, very different ways. And we don't know much about kind of what is the causal effect of these things on financial decision making. But kind of what we have seen thus far is that, yes, they have consequences. And then this means that this will change this gender gap, and we don't know in which direction yet. So it's very important that we kind of, that there will be more research on this topic in the coming years, so we can prepare for that, so we don't see too much kind of gap appearing.
That's interesting, but if we look away from the gender gap, what consequences have we seen that AI, I guess you alluded to, have brought?
So what we have seen is that, these, like with apps, we see that women adopt them to a much lower extent than men do.
Okay.
So that is, so there's a really, really large gender gap there with all trading platforms, technology, men are much, much faster at adopting them. And we don't know yet whether women will ever catch up. The men have been much faster, but will the women, is it just a question of time, or will it just not adopt at all? And the consequence, we don't know enough yet. That is So there's a lot of research, I think, like interest in this topic right now, how technology is influencing financial decision making. But we need much more evidence on, and in particular on the heterogeneity there.
Interesting. Let's talk about the paper, because you have written the paper called What Makes Depositors Tick, together with Fernande Cirelli. What was the motivation behind writing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what we were curious about is that we see in general that deposits, deposits in the aggregate, they move with interest rates. But at the same time, there's always this discussion of okay, how inactive depositors are, and that is also what we've seen. So how can these two things go together? In aggregate, the deposits move with interest rates, but they are still depositors, they are sticky, they don't move. So we wanted to investigate this, but it's very, very tricky, because typically we explain this type of inaction by some frictions. There's like technology frictions, there's assets friction, there's information frictions, all these frictions that can influence whether we take action. And we have been working, or we got access to bank transaction data, where we have very, very detailed information about all bank accounts that individuals hold within the same bank. We have information about the interest rates, we have all of transactions between accounts, and daily balances, and information also about the brokerage accounts. And in this setting, which, this is an Icelandic bank that services a large fraction of the population. And that is also important, so that we have actually a representative sample. It's not like, often with these apps, you have a very selective sample. As I mentioned, when you work with app data, you often get like 70% or 80% of the users are men. Their average income is higher. So we don't necessarily learn something about the underlying population. But in this case, we have a very representative sample and have this detailed information. And what is also very important in our setting is that during the sample period, interest rates changed a lot. And the gap between low yield and high yield accounts changed a lot, and it went up to about over 6 percentage points difference, and then also it went down to almost nothing. And what is very important here is also, in this case, the difference between these different accounts is basically only the interest rates. These accounts are very liquid. They're completely liquid. There is no limits on transactions between these accounts. It's instantaneous. So in order to move money between these different accounts, it's just a few taps in your app, and the money goes to a high yield account from a low yield account. And you can transfer it back anytime. So we were therefore very curious. Okay, this provides a very, very, it's almost like a lab. You have no other difference than interest rate. Can it then be that basically people would, they would allocate immediately when interest rate changed? Because that is what the literature would suggest. It's all about frictions. It's information frictions, as I mentioned, or technology, or time and things like that. But in this case, that cannot be. So we take away a lot of, or control for a lot of these potential explanations. And then, what is then left? Do we then see any inaction? And we were really, really puzzled when we saw the results, because the answer is yes. people are, really, really kind of sluggish on average in reallocating in response to interest rates. So you have if you imagine you have an app, you need to make a few taps and then you move all your liquid funds from an account that pays you very low return to another account that pays you 6 percentage points higher interest rates. I mean, that is.
Is it that big a difference on interest rates?
Okay. Exactly. For some periods, and the nice thing is that it went from very low to very high. So that means that we can kind of control at the individual level for, you say, these people are just different. But we can kind of compare within individuals. And actually individuals, they are kind of independent of whether the interest rate is high or low. I mean, they're as active. So it doesn't seem to matter. They are just unresponsive to interest rates. And for us, this was kind of really mind-blowing to see that. Why would individuals not do that? You see people with other apps. Often there are these games on social media or something. Oh, leave a comment and I will give you a voucher for, 200 krona or something like that, if you're among the lucky ones. And people kind of spend time on commenting and stuff like that. These kind of activity is much more time-consuming than making a few taps in your banking app. But the expected return from that is basically zero, while the expected return from transferring your liquid funds from a low yield to a high yield, that is huge, and it's a guaranteed return. So we were really, really puzzled to kind of see that this is kind of how individuals behave on average.
I think what puzzles me most about what you say is that there is such a big difference on the accounts if it goes up to 6 percentage points. Maybe it's because it's back in time where I don't recall, or what? Because right now I would guess, and this is just in Denmark, I would guess there is maybe 1 percentage point difference between a high and a low.
Exactly. This is why it was
good for us. Then you lock up your money, by the way.
This is why it was good for us to get the data from Iceland, because, inflation has been different there. So the interest rate of the central bank, so this Interbank of Iceland, has not been kind of in line with the European Central Bank. Everything here kind of follows the European Central Bank. But we kind of got data from Iceland where we have this kind of, small difference to a high difference after the COVID period. Yeah. So we kind of profited, therefore, Iceland was basically the only setting where this could have been tested. And because it's really like a very kind of clean setting to study kind of a reallocation kind of behavior. Yeah. And what is also really kind of interesting there is, like, as I mentioned, because people are this inactive and do not respond to interest rates. But still at the same time, what we see in the data is that aggregate deposits, they move with interest rates. And then when we kind of
just put them in the wrong accounts.
No, it's kind of because on average, as I said, kind of the people, they do not respond to interest rates. But what we do see is that there are some individuals that do respond to interest rates. And these are the individuals that hold the most deposits. So on average, people do not respond, but high wealth individuals, they do respond. And this is why we see kind of the deposits move in the aggregate with deposits, with the interest rate.
Okay. So just to get it straight here, the problem is essentially that there are two accounts, and then the observation is people keep on having their money in the low interest rate account.
Exactly.
Despite they could extremely easily move it to the high interest rate account.
Exactly.
And then you see the high wealth individuals, they actually utilize these high interest rate accounts for their cash, while normal or lower wealth individuals, they don't.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, there is like a paradox here. So what we see is that individuals or lower wealth, not low wealth, but they are not at the top of the wealth distribution. They do not respond. So they leave some money on the table, but not not huge amounts. And there's quite some variation at the bottom of the wealth distribution. They basically don't leave anything because they do not have anything to reallocate. kind of the median household is leaving money on the table, but not huge amounts. But they could easily kind of make, it's a guaranteed kind of or quite a high return for the time they would spend on making these few taps that they would have. But for the high wealth, they leave a lot of money actually on the table, even though they are the responsive ones. So we see that kind of high wealth individuals, they are responsive to interest rates, but low wealth individuals are not. And at the same time, it's the high wealth individuals that are leaving a lot of money on the table. And the low wealth, they don't, because they don't have anything to leave on the table.
Okay, but the low wealth, can you see what they then use the money for, so to speak? Do they consume it, or do they allocate it to equities or bonds, or they don't make decisions?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the same as what we see in most countries, that there's like at the bottom of the distribution, people, yes, they more or less they spend everything as soon as they earn it, and they never are able to build up any savings, and they're actually in the negative, so they are in the red. So people are more kind of their largest problem is to get out of the kind of consumer or get rid of their consumer credit, because they tend to, as soon as they have credit available, they tend to spend it.
But isn't that the answer then on why they don't reallocate it? Because if they don't have any money, then those 6 percentage points doesn't make any difference.
No,
anyway.
They cannot reallocate. But when we think about like the median household, they are leaving kind of money on the table. So this is kind of when we go from low wealth to high wealth, we see that, okay, low wealth, they don't leave any money on the table. They don't have any money to leave on the table. The median, they do leave money on the table, but it's not huge amounts. And the high wealth, they leave a lot of money on the table, even though they are responsive to interest rates. And this is kind of why we see that actually with monetary policy, when the central bank increases interest rates, it's only the high wealth individuals that actually take action and do reallocate. Even though, they still leave money on the table, but they are the ones that are moving. They are the ones that are responsible for this co-movement of interest rates and aggregate deposits. So we see that monetary policy kind of transmission, or the deposit channel of monetary policy transmission, is actually through a very kind of thin slice of depositors. It's only the very wealthy ones. And this is kind of not consistent with kind of the standard or like quantitative models of monetary policy that predict actually that depositors in general, households in general, they respond to interest rates. But we show that is not the case. And so this is therefore very inconsistent with these models. And what we provide in this data is kind of very useful evidence that can then be used to kind of update or discipline the existing models of the deposit channel of monetary policy.
And maybe just again about the median, because I think it makes sense that the high wealth individuals, they make active decisions, because 6 percentage points or how much it is makes a huge difference for them, right? But does the median have enough cash, so to speak, that 6 percentage points make a difference?
Yeah, if you certainly compare that, given the very low cost, I would say they would certainly profit from it. They are leaving money on the table.
Okay.
And it's not like that it's nothing. And if you compare that to kind of the time they spend, as I mentioned before, some game on social media in order to win a prize or something like that, if they could just kind of spend a few seconds kind of to tap on their banking app to move funds to a high yield account. And actually every time I present this paper, I always get some people tell me afterwards and say, hey, wow, this kind of made me think kind of what I'm doing myself. So right after your talk, I went to my bank app and transferred the funds. And I think this is kind of, this shows kind of how common this is, and people are kind of aware of it, but they just don't think about it. And even like among kind of people that are normally kind of the people that listen to me talking about these things, typically academics, finance professors, and they also kind of say, okay, this is just something, you just don't think about it, and
But that makes a lot of sense, and maybe, I mean, what does the banks do? Because it sounds rather frictionless to do it when you present it, right? But what does the banks do in order to actually make people make rational decisions in Iceland?
I mean, it's very difficult to go and kind of, you cannot be calling everyone and telling them, hey, this is what you should do or so, but they promote like these high yield accounts a lot. So kind of within the banking app, on the homepage of the banks, I mean, they always kind of really advertise the highest kind of, or like the highest yield accounts, but and it's kind of difficult to say kind of what more could they do in order to do that, because I think thus far the literature has always been a little bit more about the bad banks. I mean, they are the ones that are not kind of giving enough information, or they a lot of kind of, often like the typical kind of explanation that people think of, it's because these are only offered to the high wealth customers or something. But I mean, in our setting, that is not the case. And as I said, it appears in kind of the bank app of all customers on the homepage, kind of the front page. I mean, there it's advertised. So it's not like that it's not promoted, or it's certainly only for certain groups. And it's very difficult to think kind of what more could the banks themselves do. But what we do see is that there are some kind of, would you say, characteristics that make individuals more likely to respond to interest rates. And then I would kind of rather think, what could we do to change the characteristics, or kind of make individuals more attentive in general, or more kind of understanding, or kind of that they understand. That is something that I think could, or be more likely to make individuals kind of follow interest rates more.
But I just, and I'm from a bank myself, so I don't like calling out bad banks. But I'm just thinking, if these are two completely similar accounts, but the interest rate, why would you make a low interest rate account available even? I mean, why don't they just shut down the low interest rate account and then only keep the high?
Yeah, I mean, the low yield accounts, I mean, these are kind of the debit card accounts. So this is kind of similar to what we have to nemkonto in Denmark. And these are the accounts where you have a linked debit card and where you get paid your salary. So these, they have a function. And
but they can't be linked to the other account? No. Oh, so, okay.
So, and you cannot have a debit card linked to your savings account.
Okay.
So that is kind of the differences. And it's kind of similar to here in Denmark. I mean, you have your nemkonto, and that is the one that is kind of linked to your card.
Okay. But you can make credit card transactions from that other account as well? You
can have, your credit card transaction are typically, I mean, they're not made from account, but you just have to pay the invoice, and that you can do, anyway. Yeah. So credit cards are different in that sense.
Yeah, because I think that, I mean, thinking about my own bank account, that's obviously different than in Iceland, but I don't think it's very clear to know which account that have a high or low interest rate. I mean, at least not, and I'm even in finance, right? But it's like, it's called different names. It's not like I get a title and a percentage, right? Mm-hmm. It's something is opsparing and something is different things. And it's, I think actually often it's not very clear what's the high or low yield account.
I would say like in our setting, this is very transparent. Okay. And there is even like a page where you can look up all interest rates on all bank accounts from different banks. And then in the app, you can even, if you just tap on information, and then you see, okay, what interest rate does this bank account offer? And that you can do for any bank account. And then you can go on the homepage and compare all different of the bank and compare all the bank accounts that they offer and how the interest rates are changing. And then whenever the central bank kind of increases or decreases its key rate, and typically the banks, they update kind of the interest rates on their bank account. There is then a news announcement, and you get sent an email. So kind of customers are made very aware of kind of whenever interest rates are changing. It's easy to find information about what they are and compare different accounts. But of course, you have to then go and do these things and make the comparison. But it's very, very easy.
And maybe if you can also explain a little how that works in Iceland, because I guess here in Denmark and likely also in other countries, there can be a difference between the risk-free rate in a central bank and the interest rate you can receive in your even high-yield bank saving, because sometimes the bank are behind and seems to be waiting a little on adjusting the interest rates. How is it in Iceland? Are they mark to market, so to speak?
Yeah. There's not an immediate response, but I would say that it's typically a few days that it takes them to update, but not much more than that.
Okay, so much faster than, I guess, in Denmark, for example, because we follow ECB.
Yeah, it happens very quickly, actually.
Okay, so and so the Icelandic population are in general much more aware of central bank decisions, or
that is very difficult. I mean, our paper suggests that is not the case. I mean, at least they are not responding, kind of, or adjusting, kind of their balances in response to the interest rates, except for the very wealthy ones. So that is also then puzzling, even kind of, and this is also again about kind of the implications of our findings for the transmission of monetary policy through the deposit channel. I mean, as I said, kind of existing models predict, yes, that there is kind of immediate kind of response of more or less all households, but our paper suggests that is not the case, even though, as I said, in this setting where there is information is so kind of easy to look up and widely available, and kind of suggesting that, these are not the frictions kind of that are the most important. There is something more kind of fundamental that is going on.
Interesting. And would you expect, I don't know, maybe you have already looked at it, that it's the same case around the world other than Iceland?
Yeah. No, actually, this is a good question. We have not pushed, we have a very nice kind of laboratory setting to study this topic, and also kind of with all the information that we have from that. So it's very difficult to find the setting where we can kind of dig as deep into this. But all the other things that we see, kind of the aggregate behavior, when you look at inaction, that is kind of, this is worldwide. If we look at, kind of participation in high yield kind of accounts, that is worldwide, that is very low. And so I think there is kind of no doubt that we would see kind of the same type of behavior, because all kind of the aggregates that we see, also kind of how aggregate deposits and interest rates move, all these things, they are the same, but we are just able to dig deeper. But once when I actually presented this paper here in Copenhagen, I had a colleague here in Denmark that had similar data through his work and his research here, from a Danish bank, and he said, okay, I have to go and see if this holds up in the Danish data. He came to me a few days later and said, you know what, I saw exactly what you saw. So, even though that is not like anything published, then kind of that suggests that you see exactly the same behavior in Denmark, and I would expect that in no matter where you would do this, you would see the same behavior.
Yeah. Makes sense. Maybe lastly here, Arna, can you summarize your paper before we end?
So I would say kind of what we do is that we look at kind of what is driving action or reallocation activities of households or depositors. And we see that on average, individuals are not responsive to interest rates that apply to everyone, but they are very responsive to things that happen kind of to their own account, that is windfalls or income arrivals and things, this is the time when individuals take action. And then they're very responsive. And this has important implications, kind of, because this teaches us something about kind of the deposit channel of monetary policy transmission, and the findings will hopefully be useful kind of in disciplining existing models, so they can be more kind of in line with reality.
Amazing. Thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thank you.
Tak for, at du lyttede med til Rig på Viden. Jeg håber, at du lærte noget, og hvis du nu synes godt af vores podcast, så kan du støtte os ved at følge den på Spotify, eller skrive en anbefaling på iTunes. Inde på LinkedIn, der kan du følge André Thormand, Benjamin Somofen eller Henrik Fode Rasmussen. På genhør.